Hi, welcome to Crafting with Miss Chris. I am Miss Chris. Today I will be teaching you how to make a Tamari ball. You might recognize the word Tamari if you watch a lot of anime. Gar's sister from Naruto was named Tamari, and in Demon Slayer Suzumaru, one of the demons uses Tamari balls as weapons in Season 1. It's also, you'll see them throughout other anime in the background, especially if it's historical anime. There will be children playing with them. Sailor Moon, like the 90s Sailor Moon, had a villain that was just a giant Tamari ball with arms and legs. It wasn't referred to as a Tamari ball due to Americanization. However, I think in the new dub it does. But from seeing them all over the time in anime, I got really interested in how do you make them, like what are they made out of, and wanted to know more. So I started researching it and started learning how to make them. So today I'm going to share that information with you of their history and also how to make one. And it's a geometric repetitive pattern on them. And this style is a chrysanthemum, and this is the style I'm going to be showing you guys how to make. And so we're going to get started. To make a Tamari ball that has a bell inside of it, you will first need a bell, and then you'll need to make a small box to hold the bell. Otherwise, it will not rattle and it will not make sound. This step is totally optional. However, it is a fun added element to your Tamari ball for it to be able to make sound. And you only need a little box that's big enough for your bell to rattle around without getting crushed inside the ball. So, on the next card, I'm just drawing 4 inches. I'm going to mark where each inch is. And then mark where 1 inch from that first line is. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, so that'll be able to turn into a cube, and we're going to cut that out. Once your outline for a cube is cut out, you're just going to fold it. Along each line that you have drawn. You're going to place the bell inside and then tape the square into place. The cube doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be so you don't crush it, so that way you can hear the bell rattling inside the Tamari ball. So it's okay if it's a little wonky looking. I obviously shifted it as I was taping it, but it's not the end of the world because no one will see it. The next step, you will need the cutoff foot of a pair of stockings, your bell box, and lavender. Traditionally, you would have been using dried rice husks because that was readily available and it was a cheap filler. For mine, since it's going to be decorative, I'm going to use lavender so it also smells good. You can also just use straight polyfill and skip this step entirely, but it's a fun little bit extra to do, so I've decided to do that. And also using the lavender gets it closer to using rice husks, where you would wrap it in fabric. I'm using the stockings because it's easier. So you're just going to pour lavender into the stocking, add your bell box, and then continue pouring more lavender inside so that your bell box is completely hidden. And you want it to be more of a sphere. So right now it's a little bit of a tube, but you want to keep it hidden. So you can fill it more or you can leave it that size. It depends on how much lavender you have and how much you're willing to use, because lavender can get a little bit more expensive. It's entirely up to you. Also, the more you use, the stronger the smell is. So if you're like, I'm not super into the smell of lavender, you can skip this entirely or just use a little bit. With your ball of lavender, you don't need to tie anything off, just fold over the end and try and shape it so it's close to being a sphere, because you do want to, at the end, have a perfect ball shape, because you're going to have to do a bunch of math, and it's a lot easier if it's even than if it's like wonky and lopsided. Then you're going to take just polyfill batting. Mine's batting, so it's already laid out in sheets and strips, but you can just use regular polyfill as well. You just have to be careful to make sure that it stays even. And you're going to wrap it in multiple directions. And again, you want to try and keep it so that it is a circle. And you're going to do a few layers of this. And it's okay if it's going to be bigger, it's going to compress down after the next step. And you're going to really work on shaping it so that it's a perfect circle next. For our next step, we're going to cover this ball in yarn. You want to make sure that the yarn is moving and that you're not just wrapping in the same direction at all times. So you want to make an even sphere and keep moving, keep it nice and neat looking. It's not going to be visible, but the more even it is, the easier your life is going to be. A couple steps from now on, we have to divide this evenly, and you don't want a lumpy shape to work with. And now onto the history of Tamari. Tamari was originally invented in about the 600s in China. It was then later documented in Japan in the 1200s. Tamari means handball, so it was used as a toy originally. It was just a simple, cheap thing to make, like I had mentioned when we were making the inside. They used rice husks. They were cheap, they're readily available, they were gonna get thrown out. And then instead of using the polyfill batting that I used, scraps of fabric and silk were used. And then it was just thread and yarn they had left over. So it was just scraps and whatever was around. It was really easy, really simple. And then as time went on, women started getting more decorative about it and adding stitching and designs, not just so it would hold the shape of the ball, but also so it would look pretty. Games that were played were similar to hacky sack. The boys would use their feet and legs, whereas girls would use their arms and hands, which is why it is a handball. And they would also incorporate songs similar to jump rope, where like Miss Mary Mack and stuff like that, but they would use, obviously, songs that relate to their culture. As the art form evolved and got more and more decorative, it stopped being less used for toys and more used as specifically a form of art. And then also there was like the invention of rubber, so this kind of will bounce a little, but not great, whereas the balls that were being invented with the invention of rubber obviously could bounce better and were better for playing sports and games with. So the shift from purely like useful, fun toy for your kids to decorative art was towards the end of the Edo period, around the 1600s. But that's also why there's the bells over time, along with like little like boxes of rocks and stuff. Different things to make noises were added when it was still being used as a toy. The decorative tamari were then used as gifts between women. They would give them to new mothers for their children, and also just symbolized that they would become a mother. Mothers would give the tamari balls to their children. They used bright colors and countless threads to symbolize their hopes for the bright future and countless blessings in the new year. So it was also a holiday gift. They would also be given out as wedding gifts. Tamari wasn't a popular art form for hundreds of years until it started dying out in about the 1700s. And then it started really fading from popularity. In the mid-1900s, it started to come back into popularity again, where people were working on preserving Japanese culture and traditional art forms. And then apprenticeships started showing up again for this. Traditional apprenticeship for tamari making was 20 years because all the different designs that are out there, there's different designs. Each master artist had their own specific designs that their apprentice would then learn. Modern day apprentices and tamari artists undergo a training that lasts about 10 years. Throughout that time, they get different certifications and testings to show the quality of their craftsmanship and their work, and the different patterns and designs that they know how to make. Art form is still available. They're now being sold. Traditionally made one for smaller ones can be about $20 up to several hundreds of dollars, depending on the designs and the size of the tamari ball that is made. I'm going to be showing you one of the more basic patterns. I'm not good at math. And that's the other thing, like there's so much math involved in these designs because they're geometric designs that I totally understand how difficult this is from trying to get mine not to look very lopsided. Once you have the base of your sphere already created, you're now going to move on to the next step, which is wrapping it in thread. You want it fully covered. This is really going to help even it out even more because the thread is so fine and you really do want it to be as even and spherical as possible. And it might take a few tries. Mine are getting more spherical over time. I still struggle with it, but it's just a matter of practice. This is obviously going to take a while. So while you're working on this, you should check out the audiobooks available through the library. On our Hoopla platform, we have an audiobook of Samurai Rising. It is a biography of Minamoto Yoshitsune, and it is really cool. It's one of the first biographies about him that's in English, and it's a totally free app, so you should check it out. I will come back to you guys when I finish this and am ready to move on to the next step. So you guys should definitely check out and listen to that audiobook because that is also what I'm planning on doing. Now that you've completely wrapped your ball in thread, you're going to end it by sliding the thread onto a needle and then just stitching through the ball. And you're just going to do that a couple times so that the end of your thread is just hidden away, and then you just trim the excess. And you're just going to trim the end. Now for the tricky part, this is the part where I kept mentioning that you're going to have to do a bunch of math. We're there. So you're going to take a straight pin and just pop it into your tamari ball. And then you're going to take a strip of paper. You can also use a flexible measuring tape. And then you're just going to wrap it around. And then fold the end. And then you want to turn it and do the same thing and make sure that it is still the same. Then turn it sideways. And this one's actually really even. Most of mine are nowhere near this even. You're just going to keep checking it in multiple directions to see that it is even. And you've made a sphere, which is coming out great. So we're going to draw a line on the fold of our flexible green tape, or then a strip of paper, and then we're going to fold it in half. We're going to mark a line there as well, and then we want to find the opposite side of this pin. So we're going to wrap it. Going to be a little to the side. And then where that line is, we're going to put another straight pin. And then we're going to turn this 90 degrees and check that straight pin is still in the same spot in relation to this. And it's not, so we're going to move it. And this is going to just be you slowly moving this around to try and find the exact center, which is trickier than it looks. But you're just going to keep moving it until when you change directions, it doesn't change where you're supposed to be. So this one's still even now. Still even now. So that's your center. And now we're going to find the midpoint between these two. I'm going to push them in so I know which ones they are. So now we're going to find the midpoint between these two lines. So we're just going to fold it in half. Increase it, and do the same on the other side. So we've made those lines from our starting point. We're gonna wrap it around. And this is our new center point line. And we're gonna put a pin here, and then we're gonna move it. We're gonna put a pin here, here, opposite that one. So we have our 4. So they're not necessarily evenly spread apart right now, so we're going to take this, since we know this is going to be our midpoint, and turn the strip 90 degrees. This is their new starter one. And we're going to adjust where these pins are sitting. That one's good. We're going to adjust that one. And then we're going to change which pin we're holding against, and do the same thing to double check. Once you have your 4 evenly lined in, you are going to divide again. You want to end up with 16. So this is going to give you 8 sections. And you're just going to fold and mark the line for each one of these. So now with your 8 divisions, you're going to measure around in between these pins and get the halfway point. Put another pin in. We're going to divide each of these sections again, and that will get us to 16. Once you have your 16 evenly placed pins along the hemisphere, you're going to check that they're all in a straight line and even from the top and the bottom holes. And you're just going to keep using that strip you have and make sure that it is the midpoint, so it's 4 and 4 below it. And you're just going to keep checking and adjusting the pins until it's perfect. Once your pins for your hemisphere are evenly spaced and they're evenly placed between the top and the bottom, You are now done with the hardest part. Congratulations. And now it is time to start adding your guidelines. So your guidelines, you're going to use a contrasting color. They're still going to be visible. Like on this one, you can see where it all intersects and a little bit of the bottom as well. So I'm using silver. It's going to match all the colors I use, and it's still a pretty decorative color. And you're going to measure by just wrapping it around 11 times. That way you can go around 8 times to create all of your divisions, and then also once around the middle and have some left over. To make the divisions, you're going to start at the top. I'm just going to make a little, you're going to start from a little bit of a distance, and you're going to hide the tail of your thread inside of this. And you can tie a little bit of a knot in the bottom and just pull it all the way in, and it'll get stuck inside. And then you're going to wind to the bottom. You're going to be as close to these pins as possible. Make a tiny little stitch at the bottom next to the pin, and then go back to the top. And for me, it's just easier to always do so they're evenly spaced. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to be over here. And to the top. Make a tiny little stitch under this pin, and then go in a different direction. I normally divide it by 4s and then start going and filling in between. And you're going to do this all the way around. Once you've made all of the divisions, you're going to tuck the tail in the same way you finished off your base thread. So now we've got our 16 divisions, and we're going to create the division for the halves. So we're going to start the same way with a knot in the end, and then and we want to come out right next to one of the pins. And we're going to go from where we started. So we're going to wrap under this thread. You're going to catch some of the black thread of your base and come out next to the pin and pull it tight to hold this thread in place so it's not wiggling back and forth. I'm going to push this pin back down, and we're going to go to the next pin. And then go around behind the pin, under some black thread, under the silver thread. That's the important part because you're locking that part in place. And then we're going to pull it tight. You're going to repeat all the way around. Once you make it back to the start, you're going to just catch that again. And then you are going to tuck this tail in the same way you have been. So now you are going to decide how big of a flower that you want. I like mine to take over pretty much the whole thing. I don't want a really thick middle band, so I folded our 16th in half, and I'm going to put that half part right on that line, and I'm going to move all of our pins up. And if you want, you can also put the other pins for the second half in now as well, since you're doing it anyway and you're measuring. It'll save you time in the future. And you're just going to go along the whole thing and put your pins in. Once you have your 2 lines of pins, you're now going to flip to the top. I really like when they're closer together. I don't like it when they're as far apart. It's really up to you how you want to space it. If you want to do a full 16th down or 1/32nd, it is up to you. It is your project. I'm going to do the 32nd. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with the bottom around the hemisphere, but from this main pin, and place a circle of pins. Now that you have all of your measurements put in, it is time for the fun part. I've chosen my colors. I'm going to work from the darkest to the lightest, and then do a dark color for the outside edge on my flower, and then these two are going to be my center divide. So it's going to be very similar to this one. You can use whatever colors that you like. It is entirely up to you. It's your project. So you're going to start with the color that you want as your center focal point. So this is where I start basically. And I'm using my darkest color. You're going to put a decent amount onto your needle. You don't want it crazy long because you don't want it tangling. I have a lot of practice, but you don't want it so sure that you're constantly adding more. Once you have your divide, you are going to just slide in under on a diagonal to one of the pins and pull it through. And a knot in the end will catch and just tug it in so it disappears. And then from this line that you're at, you're going to go over one all the way to the top. Catch the yarn behind that pin under some of the black thread, and then you're going to pull it through. You're going to make a little X. So you want to come from the right to the left. And then you're going to go over 1. And again, see that little X? You want to do the same thing down here, where you're going from the right to the left. Catch us with the threads. And then you're going to do this all the way around until you get back to the beginning point. Okay, we are back to the beginning, so we're just going to come to the opposite side of our original pin, making that little X, and then instead of coming out right next to it, we're going to come back out over here at the next pin that we haven't worked. And we're going to continue that top pin, bottom pin, top pin, bottom pin, top pin, every other, in all the threads that we've missed the bottom of, and then where we've missed the top, so that it looks like this. So we're going from the bottom to the top that we've missed. And then we're just going to keep going around, making those little X's, making our chrysanthemum. So I'm almost out of thread, and if that's happening, you want to stop at a bottom one. So you're just going to go to the bottom, go in next to your pin, and then come out a little distance away and pull it through. Give it a tug, and that's going to be how you end it. You'll just trim this down and then pick up right here and continue your pattern. And you'll do that for every ending and also every time you change colors. But when you change colors, you want to change at the start of a row. So that way you don't have everything all shifted and looking wonky looking. So finishing the row 1, you're going to do the same thing where you go in here and then come out over here. And by doing this, you're going to move where your starting point is all the time, so that way you don't have a distinct, like, this is like the seam and it looks a little wonky. So I'm going to pull out all of the pins in the top now, just so it's going to be easier for you to see what I'm doing. Normally I'd leave it in through row 2 as well, but it's so much easier if you're following along with me. So we're going to do the same thing where we want to move over to the right 1 stitch, or 1 guideline. So we're down here right now, and we're going to move to here. And we're going to go below this little X that we've created already. We're going to catch some thread back behind it and just make another X. And give it a tug. So now you're going to have 2 threads together. And we're going to come down and onto the outside of where you were, to the outside of the pin, and you're going to go below it. So you're always working down from the top every time. And we're just going to slide behind here like we have been, catch some of these, and make that X. And you're going to keep doing this all the way around. In every row, you're going to move down a little bit each time. So that way it keeps expanding. And I'm going to do about 3 or 4 of each color, and then a few more rows with my lightest pink, so that the darkest part of the flower is the center, and then it gets lighter as you go out. And then trim it in this very dark color so that edge is distinct. So I will meet you guys once you've gotten there, and it's up to you to decide how many rows you want. On this one, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of dark blue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of light blue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the lightest blue, and then 1 really dark trim. And also, however big your ball is going to decide how many rows you'll be able to fit in. So you might have to adjust. Mine, this one is going to have more than this one most likely because it is bigger. So just keep doing bottom to top all the way around. Once you finish making your chrysanthemum on both sides, it is now time to make your middle band of your tamari ball. When making mine, I wrap the yarn on the outside several times to get a good guesstimate of how much I'm going to need. And then I start the same way I would for everything else. I'm going to come from the center on a diagonal to right by one of the points of my chrysanthemum. And then I'm going to wind it around the center. I have a very long piece of thread that I'm doing this with. I have a lot of experience untying knots, so it doesn't bother me. If it gets a little snags in there, I can untie them easily. You could also just use a shorter piece and then start and stop pretty much right on top of where your previous one was as you work. And I'm just lying this neatly next to each other. And right now it's not going to stay in place the way it is, but it's okay because there's another step right after this. Once you have your band completely covered, and the more symmetrical your sides are, the more these guidelines are going to be covered. Mine clearly are not perfect, but it is a learning process, and like I mentioned, it's a 10-year apprenticeship, which I clearly did not do. So you're just going to end it the same way you ended everything else. This next step is going to lock this band in place, and I'm going to measure by going around 5 times and trimming the end. Now I'm going to slide in. I want my needle to come up at one of the flower petal points, and then you can either make X's by going diagonal from one point to the next. I'm going to make mine wider, so we're going to skip a point, come here, and then come up. I'm going through some of the threads of the ball itself and come up at the other petal. And we're going to repeat this all the way around. So I'm going to skip this one and go here. Once you're back to the starting point, you're going to come back up, and then you're going to go in the opposite direction, creating X's. So now we're going to go over here, and you're going to do that all the way around. Once you get back to the beginning, you're going to end it the same way you have been this whole time, of just threading the needle through and then coming out somewhere different a couple times. And now your Tamari ball is completely finished, and you can use it to decorate with. If you're feeling brave after all this work that you just put in, you can try and use it as a hacky sack or play different games with it. I am, however, going to leave it decorative and just have it look very cool and very pretty.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.